What up, though? You called black, African American, colored, negro, negra, mulatto, so that you can ignore your natural connection to this American soil. Who are we? Who am I? Who are you? Why we been reclassified on a consistent basis for centuries and today? Who you is? Who is your ancestors? Your people? Do you care? Did you look? Where we at? Where we come from? This America, at one time on certain records, it was known as India Superior or America India. Hence the reason why a portion is still called the West Indies. This portion used to include a portion of the southeast portion of North America. You the people who sprouted up from this American soil. I think we the American Indians. And guess what? Everybody know except us. The Washington Post. But we know now. The Washington Post. Colonial remains reclassified as African American. Now, mind you, African American, no one called themselves African Americans. Who knows? Maybe they people often cite a source where a Baptist preacher used the term African American. Okay, one human, one person used it. But I'm talking as a whole. No one, no group called themselves African Americans during colonial times. Okay? My family never called me African American or black. Now, when you was riding, somebody was riding and, you was talking about somebody, you used African in a derogatory sense. But aside from that, I never heard anything about African American or black when I was growing up. So why would the Washington Post, or better yet, because as we'll find out, it's the Smithsonian Institution that actually discovered the remains. Why would the Washington Post run the story that the remains were reclassified as African American? Well, because the Smithsonian Institution must have reclassified them as African American. I mean, it's a blatant lie. How can we believe anything at this point? You can't even believe me. You got to believe yourself. You got to believe your natural senses, not what's common. The Washington Post, colonial remains reclassified as African American. Jamestown skeletons once thought to be Indians. So they were thought to be Indians, which are the people of this soil. But, and I'm speculating here because we still have to go through the actual article, But at some point, they were no longer Indians. Now they were reclassified as African Americans. Now we're talking about skeleton bones here. Either they're a certain group of people or they're not. But the bones are the bones of whoever they're from, whoever passed away. Regardless of what someone calls them, that person who made the transition was who they was. Jamestown skeletons once thought to be Indians by Boyce Rensberger, 1997. Smithsonian Institution scientists have discovered that 4 skeletons dug up decades ago at colonial Jamestown are among the oldest known remains of African Americans. Now, who are the African Americans? They are properly the American Indians. No such thing as an African American. The bones, thought to date between 1650 and 1700, were originally classified as American Indian. Why did it change? Well, look at what happened in 1790 when the census started. How many of your family members' identity was changed over and over and over again? Indians were present at Jamestown, the first successful English settlement in the New World, from its founding in 1607. Now, understand, when we're talking a settlement, you have no idea how many people were on that settlement. Could have been 10, 20, 50, 100. We're talking 100 people in a place where they never been before. Indians were present at Jamestown, the first successful English settlement in the New World, from its founding in 1607. Africans may have arrived as early as 1619. This is the 1619 story, and now big business. It says Africans may have arrived. May have arrived. They're not sure. Until now, scientists knew of only one other black person's skeleton, no such thing as a black human. Other black person's skeleton of comparable antiquity in the United States, a man whose remains were found years ago at Patuxent Point, Maryland. Douglas W. Owsley, a forensic anthropologist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, is to report the new interpretation today at a special meeting of physical anthropologists at Oregon State University in Corvallis, entitled, "Who Were the First Americans?" Owsley recently made headlines. Are they saying African Americans were the first Americans? Well, we know that no one was calling themselves African Americans, and hence because it is no such thing. So who were the first Americans? Owsley recently made headlines when he examined the skeleton of a man who died 9,400 years ago in what is now Nevada, and concluded that his skeletal features more closely resemble Europeans than modern American Indians. Also, at today's meeting, Owsley is to announce the oldest known skeleton of a child in America, an 8 to 10-year-old girl who lived about 9,400 years ago in Nevada. She was found in a rock shelter, and not the cave that yielded the body of the man of similar antiquity, but her body was wrapped in a shroud woven with the same diamond-plated matting used with the man's body. So they found a man and a 8 to 10-year-old little girl bones that were 9,400 years ago, and they said that the girl, her body, the cave that yielded the body of the man of similar antiquity, but they said her body was wrapped in a shroud woven with the same diamond-plated matting used with the man's body. The girl's remains were found in the 1930s, but her antiquity was established only last year and had not been disclosed until now. So they're not associating the two people. Like the man, the girl appears to have Caucasoid features in the shape of her skull and face. Caucasoid features 9,400 years ago in America. Both the African Americans and the Caucasoid girl will be studied in great detail, I'm sure. So it can never be that anyone was on this soil. It always has to connect to a Caucasoid, a Mongoloid, or a Negroid / African. It's a good reason for that. You have to be separated from the soil. Because if no one was here on the soil, that means that it's free, it's good for the taking, and you should understand. It may even be possible to determine what parts of Africa the men came from. Owsley said, Africans are the most physically diverse people of any continent, and individual tribes often have characteristic differences in head and face shape. So because Africans are the most physically diverse people, and tribes often have characteristic differences in head and face shape, that means that they're going to associate the remains with Africa. First, it was African American, then Indian, then now we're talking about, and then Caucasoid. Now we're talking about Africa. See the confusion here? This is a tactic. These are tactics, and they are tactics of war. This is very confusing, and it's meant to be. You're all over the place right now. I'm not all over the place right now, because it's clear to me. Owsley said the African origin of the Jamestown skeletons came to light as he was re-examining ancient human remains in a collection at Jamestown. The national and the Pan-Africanists, people who, believe in that religion, they will say, we told you. Africans were everywhere. Africans went everywhere. The National Park Service, which administers the site, had contracted for the study to comply with the federal law that requires reburial of American Indian remains if a Native American group show they are related to the deceased and if scientific analysis is completed. Now, why would Native Americans be speaking on behalf of American Indians? This is flawed already from the beginning. But see, all this stuff, this is the manufactured story. Like how, for example, a news anchor may put together a story and then go out and try to find details to fit that fictitious story. They may do that. I think this shows that when we use modern forensic techniques, we can go way beyond what we used to do, Owsley said. He noted that if the skeletons had been reburied, as has happened with other skeletons, the new knowledge would have been lost. Because they are telling you the truth about all of it, right? The Jamestown misidentifications occurred in 1940 and 1955 when anthropologists noticed that the bodies had been buried in a way not typical of English settlers. and their shovel-shaped incisor teeth were a form once thought to exist only among people resembling modern Asians. It was believed that then that American Indians descended solely from such people. So, the early researchers concluded that the skeletons were of Native Americans because they resembled Asian people. So, they were on the East Coast of America, and they said, you know what? These are Native Americans, people who come from Asia. It sounds logical, right? Owsley said he recognized immediately that the skulls were narrower than those of modern Asiatic peoples. A detailed computer-assisted analysis of scores of measurements of the skull showed a pattern typical of African men. I thought they said African people had all different shapes and sizes of heads and whatnot. Now they're showing you a computer-assisted analysis of scores of measurements of the skulls of those various types of heads, and they came up with the conclusion that it's typical. It's a typical pattern of African men. Which African men? It is well established that Africans, some slave and some free, accompanied many exploring and colonizing groups of Europeans in the New World from the earliest days. What earliest days? What's the date? Historical records show that blacks were living in Jamestown by 1624, just 17 years after the colony's founding. There is some evidence Africans had been brought to the area as early as 1619. They are thought to have been servants, but it is not clear whether they were slaves or whether they were Africans, and I spoke about that on a number of occasions. Feel free to go watch previous videos. 1619 specifically. Yeah. So remember, the article was about the bones being American Indian, and they were later reclassified as African American. They didn't say reclassified as African. See, you almost forgot what we was even reading about. Is very understandable. All of it's meant to confuse. This is a news article in a newspaper called The Weekly Guard, Council Grove, Kansas, Friday, June 14th, 1912. Negro race has billion in U.S. Okay. And we don't have to go over what a Negro is or what who colored people are when we're talking about the American soil. These are people that are not Anglo-Saxon, okay? These are people who are not Asian, who are not Afro-Eurasian. We're talking about Americans here. The only Americans you've ever known. The only Americans in the world. Negro race has billion in U.S. Return of colored people to the dark continent is impossible owing to material progress made by them, it is announced. Kansas City, Missouri. Disenfranchise the Negro and send him back to Africa? Absurd, impossible. More than $1 billion worth of United States real estate, which he owns in his own name in the United States, is not easily to be taken from him. Besides, the Negro is not an African. He is an American. African is a misnomer. Why try to send him to a country which is not his own? So says Dr. J.R. Hawkins of North Carolina, Secretary and Commissioner of Education for the African Methodist Episcopal Church, a delegate to the General Conference at the Allen Chapel. Dr. Hawkins has made a study of the business status of his race in connection with his regular work as one of their foremost educators. It probably will startle the world when it realizes that we have acquired in the last 50 years over 1 million, over 1 billion in real estate, Dr. Hawkins said. And that is only the beginning of the rapid forward march which the Negro is making as a businessman. The Negro could not help being a businessman. He was surrounded with it in the years of his slavery or his employment. He was taught how to drive a bargain in horses or real estate, even if his master, his manager, didn't teach him how to read and write. And understand that Americans were doing business, they were trading with people long before any Anglo-Saxon arrived here. And by Anglo-Saxon, I mean, hey, Afro-Eurasia, if you want to get specific. There are 400 self-supporting newspapers, daily and weekly, owned and published by Negroes in the United States. 3,000 physicians have been graduated from Negro and white schools and are now practicing among their people. 2,000 lawyers have been admitted to the bar in the United States Courts of Justice, and 380 authors are found among our race. We own 41 schools and colleges representing an investment of $38 million, and $45 million has been spent in church property for Negroes. Negro men own and control 51 banks, which are prosperous and flourishing, and 650,000 has been invested in Negro libraries. I don't even want to get into going and digging deep and learning which banks, which libraries they're speaking of. Oh, man. And it is significant that in the Southland, Negroes own 180,000 farms on which 50 years ago they toiled to the crack of the slave driver's whip. So he says, the slave driver's whip. The Negro is a born American and he feels it in his country. Africa has no call for him. It is as a fairy tale to him and everyone else. Pestilence and disease are not uncommon in Africa, but America nurtures him and makes him strong, and he likes it and intends to stay in it. America meaning the soil, his soil. It nurtures him because he nurtures it. He nurtures it. She nurtures it. American soil nurtures the American Indian, which is to say that you should be nurturing and nourishing your own children, sidebar, and not sending them to strangers, i.e. any school you can find in your area to be nurtured and nourished / educated. Let's shake it. That doctrine is being taught over 1,650,000 children in the public schools. The Negro does not ask for any special legislation in his favor, not until the 1900s, 1960s, the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, all this other stuff where they begging somebody else for something, right? The Negro does not ask any special legislation in his favor. This is 1912. The Negro does not ask for any special legislation in his favor. He is willing to take his chance and is confident that he can bear his own burden as well as the white man. And toward that end, we are striving to educate our ignorant poor, make healthy the weak, and to help more Negroes to own their own homes and farms. This is Cambridge University Press. On Postliminium, from Book 3 on the Law of War and Peace, 2013, edited by Stephen C. Neff. The origin of the word postliminy, just as in regard to those things which are captured from the enemy, so also in regard to the right of postliminium. No very sound view has been advanced by those who in more recent times have laid claim to a knowledge of the law. The subject was treated with greater painstaking by the ancient Romans, but often rather confusedly, so that the reader could not distinguish what they ascribed to the law of nations and what to the Roman civil law. Where postliminy may occur, postliminy, therefore, is a right which arises from a return to the threshold, that is, to the public boundaries. Thus, Pomponius says that he who has begun to be within our fortified lines has returned by postliminy. Paul, the jurist, defines such a return when the captive has entered our frontier. On similar grounds, the Agreement of Nations holds that postliminy occurs if a man or a thing of the sort in regard to which it has been decided that postliminy is possible has come into the territory of our friends or allies. We are to understand as friends or allies not merely those with whom we are at peace, but those who take the same side in a war. Those who come to such friends begin to be protected in the name of the state. It makes no difference, in fact, whether a man or thing has come to them or to his own people. Okay, so now we will go to, pay attention, the War Department Library. The War Department Library, from the Smithsonian Contributions to Knowledge. From the Smithsonian Contributions to Knowledge. Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley by E.G. Squire, A.M., and E.H. Davis, M.D. Just when I mention the Mississippi Valley, I know who comes to mind. It's easy. It's easy. Again, don't forget, this is from the War Department Library, from the Smithsonian's Contributions to Knowledge, published for the authors, 1848. The War Department Library. This volume is intended to form the first of a series of volumes consisting of original memoirs on different branches of knowledge published at the expense and under the direction of the Smithsonian Institution. The publication of this series forms part of a general plan adopted for carrying into effect the benevolent intentions of James Smithson, Esquire of England. This gentleman left his property in trust to the United States of America to found at Washington an institution which should bear his own name and have for its objects the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. This trust was accepted by the government of the United States, and an act of Congress was passed August 10th, 1846, constituting the president and the other principal executive officers of the general government, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Mayor of Washington, and such other persons as they might elect honorary members. An establishment under the name of the Smithsonian Institution for the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. If you don't understand a word, look it up. Look up the synonym. Look it up. It would do you well to carry into effect the purposes of the testator. The plan of organization should evidently embrace two objects. One, the increase of knowledge by the addition of new truths to the existing stock. The other, the diffusion of knowledge, thus increased among men. No restriction is made in favor of any kind of knowledge, and hence each branch is entitled to and should receive a share of attention. The Act of Congress establishing the institution directs, as a part of the plan of organization, the formation of a library, a museum, and a gallery of art, together with provisions for physical research and popular lectures. One part to be devoted to the increase and diffusion of knowledge by means of original research and publications. The other half of the income to be applied in accordance with the requirements of the Act of Congress to the gradual formation of a library, a museum, and a gallery of art. The details of the two parts of the general plan. Details of the first part of the plan: to increase knowledge. Hey, what's happening today? Has there been a increase in knowledge, an increase in information within the past 20 years? To increase knowledge, it is proposed and it is proposed to stimulate research by offering records consisting of money, metals, etc., for original memoirs on all subjects of investigation. No memoir on subjects of physical science to be accepted for publication which does not furnish a positive addition to human knowledge. No memoir on subjects of physical science to be accepted for publication which does not furnish a positive addition to human knowledge, resting on original research, and all unverified speculations to be rejected. The judge, jury, and executioner. To increase knowledge, it is also proposed to appropriate a portion of the income annually to special objects of research under the direction of suitable persons. And we all know, or we should know, that a person is a corporation. A person is considered a corporation. System of extended meteorological observations for solving the problem of American storms. We're going to solve the problems of American storms. How, pray tell? Explorations in descriptive natural history and geological, magnetical, and topographical surveys to collect materials for the formation of a physical atlas of the United States. Solution of experimental problems such as a new determination of the weight of the earth, of the velocity of electricity and of light, chemical analysis of soils and plants, collection and publication of articles of science accumulated in the offices of government. the office of government, to govern or to control. Historical records, historical researches, and accurate surveys of places celebrated in American history. Ethnological researches, particularly with reference to the different races of men in North America, also explorations and accurate surveys of the mounds and other remains of the ancient people, they say, of our country. They're taking ownership now. Now, the second part is to diffuse knowledge. It is proposed to publish a series of reports giving an account of the new discoveries in science and of the changes made from year to year in all branches of knowledge, not strictly professional. This part contemplates the formation of a library, a museum, and a gallery of art. To carry out the plan before described, a library will be required, consisting first of a complete collection of the transactions and proceedings of all the learned societies in the world, of the more important current periodical publications and other works necessary in preparing the periodical reports, with reference to the collection of books other than those mentioned above. Catalogs of all the different libraries in the United States should be procured in order that the valuable books first purchased may be such as are not to be found elsewhere in the United States. It is believed that the collections in natural history will increase by donation as rapidly as the income of the institution can make provisions for their reception, and therefore it will seldom be necessary to purchase any articles of this kind. Attempts should be made to procure for the gallery of art cast of the most celebrated articles of ancient and modern sculpture. I'm sure they already got these things. They don't need to procure anything. They just take it. Let's shake it. A small appropriation should annually be made for models of antiquities, such as those of the remains of ancient temples. For the present, or until the building is fully completed, only one permanent assistant to the secretary will be required to act as librarian. The secretary and his assistants during the session of Congress will be required to illustrate new discoveries in science and to exhibit new objects of art. Distinguished individuals should also be invited to give lectures on subjects of general interest. When the building is completed, and when, in accordance with the act of Congress, the charge of the National Museum is given to the Smithsonian Institution. Let's put it into perspective here. Would you? We're going to put it into perspective. This is from uslegal.com. Postliminium is a term of public international law. The term invalidates all illegitimate acts that an occupant may have performed on a given territory after its recapture by the legitimate sovereign. Let me say that again. Postliminium is a term of public international law. The term invalidates all illegitimate acts, all illegitimate theater that an occupant, that the United States, that Anglo-Saxons, that invaders may have performed on a given territory, America, after its recapture by the legitimate sovereign, by the American Indians. If an occupant has sold a private or public property when the land was under occupation of an enemy alien, the original owner, you, can reclaim the property when the land is recaptured, has to be recaptured, without paying any compensation. Recapture seems difficult, especially if you're only thinking in terms of physical, especially if you're thinking in terms of force, physical force, then it seems almost fantastical. It seems almost, it's way out of your scope. The original owner, for example, if an occupant has sold a private or public property when the land was under occupation of an enemy alien like it is today, the original owner, the American Indian, the American you, can reclaim the property when the land is recaptured without paying any compensation. Postliminium also means the rule by which persons captured in war, you, return to their original status when resorted to the jurisdiction of their own country, America. It's on you, baby. Do the right thing.